In this lesson, we'll learn how to set up the camera and lights for a studio render. At the end of the last lesson, we had done our V-Ray setup as well as the override material. What we need now before we can hit render for our first test is to actually have a camera and a lighting setup. So we're going to go and do this. Let's start by looking in our top view. Here's our platform that we're going to be modeling our Expo Pavilion on. And let's go ahead first of all and start our lighting setup. Now, we're going to do this quite differently to a typical outdoor architectural scene where we add a light and a outdoor V-Ray environment, etc., etc. We just want to get something that looks like a indoor studio environment so that this looks like a physical built model that is sitting on a table. So to go and do that, we're going to first of all start with our V-Ray HDRI environment. So to get that set up, let's go into our material editor by hitting M on the keyboard and click Get Material on the left-hand side. You will then be able to go and scroll down all the way to V-Ray HDRI, double click on that, and then you can browse for the HDRI file which is provided in the project files, 3D Max files, and textures. So go ahead and click on that, and then you will just need to adjust the mapping type. I believe it is either cubic or spherical in this case. I think it is spherical. You can just double click on it, open it up, and then also you can turn the horizontal rotation just to see that it looks correct from all sides. Now, this HDRI can then be applied into the environment slots in the V-Ray tab. So let's just go down to that environment. Let's just go and drag that in. Let's first of all rename it. We're going to call this HDRI Indoor and instance that into there. We're going to be using the same one for both lighting and reflection. Generally, if you wanted to do this the proper way and you had more time and you weren't in this rushed workflow as I'm showing you in this course, you would want to get a blurrier, smaller, low-res HDRI for your lighting and a much sharper, crisper reflection HDRI to show, as I said, those sharp, crisp reflections in your reflections within your scene. So we're going to be using the same one just for speed's sake, and that will most likely do the job in our case. So let's now go ahead and add two other lights. We're going to be doing a typical studio setup where we have a primary and then a secondary light. Typically the primary is going to be a smaller, brighter light, and the second light will be a bigger, more diffuse light. So in the lights area, in the lights tab, go into V-Ray, and then let's add two V-Ray lights. First of all, I'm going to start with the brighter light on this side, and I'm going to rotate it and angle it towards my platform. In my front view, I'm going to lift it up slightly higher, and this one is going to be quite high, almost shining at 45 degrees. And then when I want to turn it, when I want to look at it or angle it down towards the side, you'll see that I can't exactly rotate it. So I need to Alt right mouse button click and go to my local UCS so that basically I can angle it along this axis. And that will then allow me to position it so that it's pointing directly at the site itself. So let's look at the settings for this. Once we click on it, we can have a look at that. We can call this light 1, which will be our brighter light. And the multiplier, we can start out with a multiplier of 10. And I will keep that light invisible, and we can just keep everything as it is in this section. So next I will move and make a copy, holding down Shift, make a copy of that light. This one will be called light 2. And I'm going to rotate it so that it's basically shining into the shadowed area, or the shaded area of what we're busy illuminating with our primary light. And then just don't forget to make the light a lot bigger. So let's say 300 by 300. And this one can now be very diffuse. We can start with a multiplier of 1 and then increase it if we are able to. We can also bring this light slightly lower so that we can really try and illuminate some of those shadows. I'm also going to bring down this figure slightly and then angle it slightly higher. There we go. Now we need to set up a camera. So we can go into the camera tab and go down to V-Ray camera, and we'll add one V-Ray physical camera. Just click and drag from the point that you are viewing to the point that you are from the camera position to the target position. Another good thing to do is if you do have any temporary cameras like the one that we used to camera match this modeling sequence for this museum, you can go and rename that camera. For example, this would be called Museum Match Cam, and we can right click and hide that. Now we only have one camera in our scene that we can physically see so that we don't get confused between the two if they are in a similar position. So this camera now in my front view, I'm going to move it up slightly higher, and once I think it is more or less in the right position, hit C on your keyboard, and then you can go and locally adjust the camera position using your camera settings on the bottom right. Also, if you want to turn your lights on and off, then that is just a case of hitting Control L on your keyboard to basically toggle that lighting setting. So once your camera is selected, a good idea is to rename it, and let's call this one Cam01. And I'm also going to add this to an individual selection set, which is also going to be called Cam01. I like to do that with my cameras and lights because those are generally the things that are outside of my view. What that means is that if my camera is not selected and I want to select it, I don't need to look in my top view, turn my camera on, and then go and click on it. I can directly select it from the drop-down menu within my named selection set, and that just brings up this camera setting much quicker than actually going into the top view. So all of these little tricks do definitely cut down a lot of your time and therefore do help you to get your modeling done a lot quicker. As far as the camera settings, we're going to also keep this quite simple in the beginning. The general setting that I like to use is, first of all, to turn off vignetting. I don't like to have any darkened corners in Max itself. I rather do that in post-production in each case. The white balance is going to start out at neutral, especially we don't want to have any colored white balance because we're not going to be having very blue skies, very yellow suns, because we have a quite neutral indoor environment lighting setup. The shutter speed, I'm going to start out at a value of 10. And we can go and increase that, in other words, speed up the time or decrease it if we need to change our lighting once we've done our first test render. For the ISO, I generally start out with a figure of 200. And that is pretty much it. That's the only thing I really adjust. So my camera settings are pretty quick as well. So just before we finish this lesson off, let's quickly hit render right now and let's just see what we've done, and we can then discuss how we can change those camera settings just to set up our scene a little bit more properly, adjust our camera position as well, and just get everything ready for the modeling process that's going to happen thereafter. So I'm going to pause the video now, do a tiny test render, and let's have a look at what our first result is. So there we go, that's the first render. I'm going to go into the render settings, or the settings itself, and I'm going to turn on the frame stamp so we can just have a look at how our frame time is doing as we progress throughout the course, so that we can just see the process as to how rapidly we can get our renders out so that we don't necessarily slow things down by any particular process. So the first thing I can see that the image is quite blotchy. So most of this blotchiness is due to the fact that our subdivision multiplier is really low, as well as the fact that our V-Ray HDRI may be too high res to be used as a GI environment light. So we're going to test it on and off in following lessons as we progress along. The main thing I wanted to show you is that basically with a very normal and quick light and camera setup without necessarily doing any test renders, this one is the first one off the bat, and already it's almost workable just to get started, to basically see what your model is looking like. So now you can really get going and you can start making those adjustments, and that's exactly what we're going to do in the next lesson, so hang around for that.